What's happening right now could change how players earn their place, how stars protect their status, and even how we experience PGA Tour events throughout the season. And at the same time, the FedEx Cup playoffs are delivering exactly the kind of pressure and drama that reminds us why this sport is so addictive. There are two very different stories unfolding, but both come down to one thing: who gets to stay at the top when the pressure gets real? If you're a true PGA Tour fan, hit that like button, subscribe to PGA Tour Today, and help us reach our first 15,000 subscribers. This channel is for fans who actually love following this sport week after week. So if that's you, you're in the right place. Let's start with the bigger picture, because the PGA Tour is preparing for a structural change that could completely alter what it means to be a tour player. Beginning in 2028, the PGA Tour plans to introduce a two-series competitive model: the PGA Tour Championship Series and the PGA Tour Challenger Series. And I'll be honest, as a fan, the concept is fascinating, but it also comes with some pretty serious questions. The Championship Series would become the top level, featuring the tour's elite players and its most important events. The plan calls for approximately 130 players, with at least 90 players retaining their status for the following season. Then you have the Challenger Series, which would serve as the second level and, potentially, the most important proving ground for players trying to reach the top. At least 20 players from the Challenger Series would earn promotion to the Championship Series. That is a huge change, because professional golf has never really operated with such a direct promotion and relegation structure. Imagine a young player dominating the Challenger Series, earning promotion, and suddenly finding himself competing against the biggest names in the sport. That creates a completely different kind of motivation. But there's another side to it. If you're struggling at the highest level, you could eventually be moving in the opposite direction. And that means reputation alone may no longer be enough. One of the most fascinating consequences is what happens to an established star who has a terrible season. Right now, an accomplished player can have a disappointing year and still have significant protection through exemptions, career achievements, and other forms of eligibility. Under this new model, that security becomes much less certain. A top star having a bad season could actually face the risk of relegation, and think about what that does psychologically. If a superstar starts struggling halfway through the year, every tournament suddenly matters even more. Every missed cut, every missed opportunity, every poor finish could become part of a much bigger fight to remain among the best. The PGA Tour sees that pressure as a positive. The argument is simple: if you want to stay at the highest level, you have to perform at the highest level. And I understand that argument. As a fan, there's something incredibly appealing about knowing that performance actually has consequences. But I also understand why some players are uncomfortable with it, because even the biggest stars could eventually lose some of the protection they have traditionally enjoyed. For some players, that pressure could be exactly what they need. For others, it could become a source of frustration, and prominent players have already expressed concerns about the restructuring and the unintended consequences it could have for established stars and for the tours as a whole. One of the biggest questions is what happens to the smaller tournaments. Because if the Championship Series becomes the obvious destination for the biggest names and the biggest events, what happens to the traditional tournaments outside that elite schedule? This is where I think the PGA Tour has to be extremely careful. If major stars are concentrated in fewer events, those smaller tournaments could lose some of the things that make them attractive in the first place. Fewer stars can mean fewer television viewers. Fewer viewers can mean less fan interest. Less fan interest can mean less media attention, and less media attention can make those tournaments less attractive to sponsors. That creates a potential chain reaction that the tour cannot ignore. Think about a sponsor investing heavily in a tournament because they expect recognizable players, television exposure, and fans to be watching. If the biggest stars stop appearing there consistently, the commercial value of that event could decline. And then you potentially get a cycle where fewer stars lead to fewer fans lead to less television interest, and less television interest leads to less sponsor appeal. That is probably one of the biggest risks attached to this entire reform. Because it's one thing to make the Championship Series stronger, it's another thing to make everything outside of it weaker. And that is where the Challenger Series becomes incredibly important. The PGA Tour has to make sure that the Challenger Series is not simply viewed as the place where players who aren't good enough for the top level are sent. It needs to become a meaningful, competitive environment with its own identity, its own storylines, and enough commercial value to stand on its own. And there is a very strong argument that this new system could actually be great for young players. Imagine an unknown player dominating the Challenger Series. He earns promotion. He arrives in the Championship Series. He starts beating established stars. Suddenly, the golf world has a new name to talk about. That's a compelling story. And more importantly, it gives young players a clearer answer to a question that has always existed in professional golf. How exactly do I get to the biggest stage? Under this system, the question becomes much more direct. How quickly can I earn promotion? That could create new rivalries, new stars, and new narratives that fans can follow from the beginning. It could also force struggling veterans to keep fighting. There's no room to become completely comfortable with your status if poor performance can eventually send you down. So in that sense, the PGA Tour is trying to make professional golf more merit-based. But there's still a very real possibility that the system creates two completely different worlds. At the top, you have the biggest names, the biggest events, and the biggest money. Below that, you have developing players fighting for promotion and established players fighting to get back. That could be fantastic for competition. But it could also create a bigger financial divide between the two levels. If the Challenger Series doesn't maintain enough fan and sponsor interest, and this is exactly why fans are already divided. Some fans are going to look at this and say, finally, poor performance has real consequences. Finally, young players have a clearer pathway, finally. There is a more obvious competitive hierarchy. But other fans are going to look at the same system and worry that professional golf is becoming too concentrated around the biggest stars and biggest events. And honestly, I think that concern deserves to be taken seriously. One of the things that makes the PGA Tour interesting is the variety. It's not just the biggest tournaments, it's seeing major players show up in different places, compete in different conditions, and give fans at smaller events the chance to watch their favorite golfers in person. If that disappears, the tour could make its biggest tournaments stronger while accidentally damaging some of the events that helped build the broader ecosystem. That's the gamble. The PGA Tour is betting that stronger competition, clearer consequences, and meaningful promotion will outweigh the potential loss of star power at smaller tournaments. And there are some obvious benefits. More pressure on established players, more opportunities for young players, stronger elite fields, a clearer competitive hierarchy, greater consequences for poor performance, and more meaningful promotion battles. But there are also serious risks. Less star power at smaller tournaments, lower fan interest in some events, more difficulty attracting sponsors, more pressure on established players, a potentially larger financial gap between the two levels, and frustration from stars who don't want to lose the security and freedom they've traditionally had. That last part could become especially important because the PGA Tour's biggest stars are a huge part of the sport's commercial value. If those players feel that the new structure limits their freedom, reduces their status, or threatens where and how they can compete, the tour could face pushback from exactly the players it needs to sell this new era. So that's the first major story. But while the PGA Tour is talking about building a future where every player could be fighting for his place, the present is already giving us a perfect example of just how brutal that fight can be. Because right now, we're in the FedEx Cup playoffs. And the BMW Championship is heading to St. Louis, where the pressure is about to become absolutely enormous. After the FedEx St. Jude Championship, Scottie Scheffler arrives at Belarive Country Club as the overwhelming favorite. And after what he just did in Memphis, it's hard to argue with that. Scheffler won the FedEx St. Jude Championship by 8 shots. 8. That dominant victory gave him his 21st PGA Tour title and strengthened his control of the FedEx Cup standings. He has already secured the #1 position in the FedEx Cup standings, which guarantees him a $23 million bonus after the BMW Championship. That means Scheffler has already taken a huge piece of the pressure off his shoulders. But as a fan, that almost makes the question more interesting. Can anybody actually stop him? Because he's playing with enormous confidence. He's sitting at the top of the standings, and he just completely overwhelmed the field in Memphis. But the story behind him is where things get really interesting. The BMW Championship has only 50 players. That makes it one of the most exclusive tournaments of the season. And the real battle isn't just about winning the tournament, it's about making it to East Lake. After this week, only the top 30 players will advance to the season-ending Tour Championship. That means 20 more players are going to see their seasons end. And when you have only 50 players left, every single position becomes incredibly important. Just look at what happened to Sungjae Im. He entered the FedEx St. Jude Championship, ranked 53rd in the FedEx Cup standings. He needed a huge week just to keep his season alive, and he delivered. Sungjae Im climbed 13 positions and moved all the way into 40th place, which was enough to earn his spot in the BMW Championship. And remarkably, he was the only golfer outside the top 50 to play his way into this tournament. That is exactly what playoff golf is supposed to feel like. One week can completely change your situation. One great performance can keep your season alive. One bad performance can end it. And unfortunately for Jordan Spieth, that's exactly what happened. Spieth's season came to a disappointing end in Memphis. He opened the tournament with a bogey-free 65 and even briefly shared the lead. For a moment, it looked like he might be making the kind of run that would completely change his playoff situation. But the weekend didn't go his way. He struggled, failed to collect enough FedEx Cup points, and finished 52nd in the standings. That means Jordan Spieth missed the BMW Championship by just 2 positions. And that's brutal. When you're that close, you can't help but look back at every shot and every opportunity. For Spieth, the playoff run is over. For everyone still alive though, the pressure is only getting higher, and the BMW Championship field is loaded. Rory McIlroy is still alive. Xander Schauffele is still alive. Ludwig Berg is still alive. Victor Hovland is still alive. Tommy Fleetwood is still alive. Colin Morikawa is still alive. Cameron Young is still alive. And Justin Thomas is still alive. Those are some serious names. And when you combine that group with Scottie Scheffler coming off an 8-shot victory, you get a tournament that feels almost impossible to ignore. But there's another reason every shot matters. Money. The BMW Championship has a $20 million purse, with $3.6 million going to the winner. But the real financial stakes extend far beyond the tournament itself. Nearly $100 million in FedEx Cup bonus money will be distributed following the event. So when we talk about a player moving up 1 or 2 positions in the standings, we're not talking about something meaningless. Those positions can be worth a tremendous amount. And more importantly, they can determine whether a player gets to continue his season at East Lake. That's why the atmosphere around this tournament is so different. You've got Scottie Scheffler trying to continue what has already been an incredible run. You've got stars like Rory McIlroy, Xander Schauffele, Ludwig Berg, Victor Hovland, Tommy Fleetwood, Colin Morikawa, Cameron Young, and Justin Thomas trying to position themselves for the final stage. And you've got players who are simply trying to survive. That contrast is what makes the FedEx Cup playoffs so compelling. At one end, you have Scottie Scheffler, already sitting in the number 1 position and guaranteed that $20-3 million bonus. At the other end, you have players fighting for the final spots just to make it to East Lake. And that's why I'm watching this BMW Championship so closely. Because with only 2 tournaments remaining before the FedEx Cup champion is crowned, the margin for error is basically disappearing. Every shot can determine who advances. Every position can determine who goes home. And every player entering East Lake needs to believe he has a realistic chance of winning one of the biggest prizes in golf. That's also why these 2 stories actually connect in a pretty interesting way. The PGA Tour is talking about building a future where performance determines your place more than ever. Well, the FedEx Cup playoffs are already showing us what that feels like. Scottie Scheffler has performed at an incredible level and sits on top. Sungjae Im responded to pressure with a huge performance and saved his season. Jordan Spieth struggled at the wrong time and saw his playoff run end. That's the harsh side of professional golf. There's no guarantee. There's no promise that yesterday's reputation will save you tomorrow. And that's exactly the philosophy the PGA Tour appears to be trying to push even further with the 2-tier system. The big question is whether that philosophy will make the sport better for everyone. Will it create more meaningful competition? Will young players have a better path? Will established stars become even more motivated? Will the biggest tournaments become stronger? Or will the tours create a system where the biggest events get all the attention while smaller tournaments struggle to survive? We simply don't know yet, but the direction is clear. The PGA Tour is trying to create an environment where every player has something to fight for. And right now, the FedEx Cup playoffs are giving us a pretty powerful preview of what that pressure looks like. Scottie Scheffler is in control. Sungjae Im fought his way back into the picture. Jordan Spieth is already out. And a loaded group, including Rory McIlroy, Xander Schauffele, Ludwig Berg, Victor Hovland, Tommy Fleetwood, Colin Morikawa, Cameron Young, and Justin Thomas is heading into one of the most important tournaments of the season. The BMW Championship at Bellerive Country Club is not just another stop on the schedule, it's a survival test. It's a positioning battle. And for some players, it's the last chance to keep the dream of winning the FedEx Cup alive. As a PGA Tour fan, this is exactly the kind of stretch of the season I love. The stakes are massive, the fields are loaded, the stars are under pressure, and every single shot suddenly feels like it matters. At the same time, the Tours is preparing for a future where that kind of pressure could become even more permanent. The two-tier system is designed around a very simple idea: perform and move up, struggle and risk going down. For young players, that could be an incredible opportunity. For veterans who are struggling, it could be a nightmare. For established stars, it could completely change how they manage their seasons. For smaller tournaments, it could be a major challenge. And for fans, it could either make professional golf more competitive than ever, or create an even bigger divide between the elite and everyone else. That's what makes this moment so fascinating. We're not just watching another PGA Tour season. We're watching the sport try to figure out what its future is supposed to look like. And honestly, I think the next few years are going to tell us a lot. Because if the PGA Tour gets this right, the result could be incredible. Stronger competition, clearer pathways for young players, more meaningful consequences, and bigger storylines throughout the season. But if they get it wrong, we could end up with an elite championship series that dominates the attention, while smaller events struggle to maintain their identity. And that's the part I'll be watching closely. Because as much as I love seeing the biggest stars compete against each other, I also don't want the rest of the PGA Tour to become an afterthought. The sport needs both. It needs the Scottie Schefflers, the Rory McIlroys, the Xander Schauffels, the Ludwig Bergs, the Victor Hovlands, the Tommy Fleetwoods, the Colin Morikawas, the Cameron Youngs, and the Justin Thomases. But it also needs the next generation trying to become those stars. And it needs tournaments outside the biggest spotlight to remain meaningful. That balance is going to be incredibly difficult, and right now, the PGA Tour is betting that it can find it. As for the BMW Championship, there's no hiding from the pressure anymore. Scottie Scheffler has already put himself in an incredible position. Sungjae Im has shown what one great week can do. Jordan Spieth has shown how quickly the playoffs can end. And with only 30 spots available for Eastlake, every player still in St. Louis knows exactly what is at stake. This is where the FedEx Cup postseason becomes something different. It stops being about simply playing good golf. It becomes about surviving. It becomes about taking advantage of every opportunity. And ultimately, it becomes about putting yourself in position to lift the trophy when the season reaches its final stage. That's why I can't wait to see what happens next. And if you're following the PGA Tour as closely as I am, you already know this is the part of the season where one round can completely change the story. So make sure you're here for it. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and let me know in the comments. Do you think this new PGA Tour two-tier system is actually going to make professional golf better? Or do you think it risks hurting the smaller tournaments and creating too much separation between the stars and everyone else? And what about the BMW Championship? Can anybody stop Scottie Scheffler right now? Or are we watching the favorite take another massive step toward the FedEx Cup? PGA Tour Today is still a new channel, and I really want to build this place with fans who actually love talking about the PGA Tour, the players, the rankings, the tournaments, and all the drama that comes with this sport. So if you're one of those fans who wants honest opinions and real PGA Tour conversation, subscribe and join us. We're starting with a goal of 15,000 subscribers, and I'd love for you to be part of getting us there. I'm Charles, and this is PGA Tour Today. I'll see you in the next one.